Thank you, James, for taking the time this afternoon here at Stockton Con and being able to talk a little comics for the next half hour or so. And obviously your famous book being The Crow. Talk a little bit about the nature of creating monsters and characters of that nature, and how you bring those characters to life on a page.
Yeah. Well, I think like any decent writer, like part of you is in every character, from the nice guy to the villain. So yeah, it's a way to explore life, through fiction.
And we will welcome Dan here as well.
Hi.
And we're just talking movie monsters to begin with, and being able to kind of create those characters and bring them to life to page. Maybe talk about your processes in regards to bringing a story to life, and the way you write it, the way you create those images to really capture a reader's attention. I asked the hard ones to begin with. The easy ones are later.
No, that's fine.
I wasn't listening.
So for me, monsters are kind of part of who I am.
Right.
I think
Growing up from Universal Monsters and
not even that. It's
No?
just being afraid of the dark when I was a kid. And so the monsters that I drew were not a reflection of that as much as the monsters that I could control. So they were my monsters. And, there's so many things when you're growing up that you have to deal with. And no matter who you are or where you come from, everyone's got hurdles. And everyone's got bullies, and everyone's got things they're scared of or they're not sure about. And all that stuff kind of balls up. And I didn't see those as monsters, but they came out in my dreams and my imagination. Just turn the light off and everything in your room becomes something that's out to get you. And I don't think you have those kinds of, I didn't understand this then, but I don't think you have those kinds of fears until there's something in your life that's causing fear. And I've seen that with my own kids. And one of my kids had an awful time when the lights went out, even with a nightlight. And I said, if you can imagine something horrible waiting for you in the dark, you can imagine something good. And I wish it was that simple. It was not that simple for me. Except that in some ways, that was how I got through it, was through art and stories and things like that. So my monsters and James's monsters, I think, are a little different. James is, I think, much more confrontational with the fears and the pain of his life and his work. Whereas I'm very much an escapist type of guy with that. And nothing illustrated that more intensely than one of the times we sat on a panel together. We knew each other, but we weren't friends yet. And we were in this panel with a bunch of different people. It was all a horror-related panel at Dragon Con. And I was at one end, he was at the other end. And they asked the question, where does it come from? And James says, he leans forward. After everyone's given their cool answers, James leans forward and he goes, all my work comes from a place of pain and suffering, more or less.
yeah.
And I was like, what?
Yeah. Well,
And I thought, wait a minute, does that mean he doesn't enjoy what he does? Does that mean he's not enjoying this stuff? And I just felt horrible for you.
Yeah.
I felt like, God damn, I love doing this. This is
No,
what makes me happy.
No,
But I didn't know you
do
then.
get joy out of it.
Yeah. But you also like to be a morose MFer too.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's just like I love the dark, in the dark all things are possible, And as a kid growing up, I grew up in an orphanage in Detroit. I spent a lot of time in the dark.
He grew up okay, did you catch what he said? He grew up in an orphanage in Detroit. Let that sink in for a second.
Yeah, me and my brother were the only two white kids in there, so they kind of segregated us away from everybody. So, and it's, no one would play with us. My brother had TB, so I hardly ever got to see him. And
And you spent longer there because your brother was sick.
Yeah, they wanted us to get adopted together. So they're like, you want the cute blonde-haired one, you got to take the sick one too, you know, which I do appreciate now, you know.
Wait,
but we
wasn't
spent
your brother cute and also blonde-haired?
no,
Oh.
no, he has a different dad than I do.
Well, you guys do look like brothers.
Yeah,
It's a very strong.
Yeah, we do
family
now,
resemblance.
definitely. But yeah, so it was tough, but that, you know, that was the birth of me learning to entertain myself and explore things on paper. You know, no one would play with me, so I would sit there and draw on the backs of flyers or menus or anything that was laying around. You know, and I found a lot of joy and freedom in that. I could control all that suffering on the page.
Yeah.
You know.
You could influence the outcome in your art in a way you never
Yeah.
could in life.
Yeah, and all
That's
the
what you
nurses and orderlies, you know, they thought I was talented, so they would bring me crayons and pencils and stuff to draw on. So you know,
That was one thing that was really great about coming up as a young kid and being an artist, or not really realizing that you were an artist, but you just like to draw.
Right.
Is that when older people and your peers would notice it, and they'd start to say things to you that you never would have thought you would have heard that were positive.
Right.
Like, I'm
For-
going to
yeah, the
save
first
this
approval,
drawing
yeah.
you did for me because someday you're going to be famous. And I'd be like, sure. But I heard that a lot when I
Yeah.
was growing up, and I just always took it, you know, with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
Or you had adults that were like, oh, you're very talented or you're very creative and all this stuff, and you hear that over and over again, and you're like, okay, cool. I don't know. It doesn't make me,
And later
doesn't
in
make walking
elementary
home from
school, yeah,
or
elementary
being
school,
chased
I got
home from
attention.
School any
Yeah.
bit easier, but you
I
know.
got attention for it, and you
Yeah.
know that was very
So the
positive.
reinforcement is good, for sure. And does it make you want to do it more? I think you're going to do it anyway.
Or, yeah.
Yeah, whether you're getting that.
If you don't have a passion for it, you're just wasting your time. You're gonna do it whether it sells, or if it's just for yourself. You know.
My 18-year-old son is very artistic and loves to draw, and his stuff is very much more internal, much more of what's going on coming out onto the page, and much more thoughtful than my stuff. My stuff was all, you know, stories, monsters, and good guys and bad guys, and that kind of thing. You know, whatever meaning was in the stuff I was doing was kind of hidden. It wasn't overt. And his stuff is much more overt. He's much more of a, you know, it's not that I wasn't an introspective person. I just didn't put that on the paper. Or at least I didn't realize I was doing it. And he definitely puts it all on the paper. And you know my Evan
Yeah.
stuff. And I would say, when he was in high school, I'd be like, oh, you should be selling drawings on Instagram. 'Cause I go, you got people, James O'Barr thinks you're great. I think you're great. Pay attention. You know, monetize what you're doing. Turn this into a career. And he just didn't have that ambition or drive to do that. It wasn't what he was about. What he was doing was for him, and it made him feel good. And he liked sharing with other people, but it wasn't the positive feedback I think that he was looking for, and that he was craving. It wasn't the attention he was craving. It was an outlet, and I have a lot of respect for that. And I think there's more true art.
But don't you
in
think it's
that.
kind of a shame that, you know, that singular talent is not going anywhere?
It happens all the time. I
Yeah.
mean, I met a guy who literally he sells insurance for a living, and he came to a convention in the 90s, and he's a guy with a wife and kids and a good salary, and he brought all these just stacks of drawings. This guy
Yeah.
could have been an image artist. He could have been a flavor of the week of the month. I mean, he would have gotten a
He
job
could have made
like
a lot of
right
money,
away.
yeah.
He was very talented. He had everything you needed to have to be a talented, successful comic book artist, except the interest. He liked drawing it. He liked to do it, but it wasn't a drive within
Yeah.
him to do it for a
Yeah,
living.
my son, I have a grown son too. He's 28 now, but he's an amazing artist. You know, I guess for him watching me work and things, you know, he would draw on a table next to my drawing board and stuff. But he didn't have the same passion for it. You know, he had a really comfortable upbringing, so. There, you know,
Maybe, yeah.
everything was very Gustav Klimt decorative
Uh-huh.
and, you know, intricately detailed. But I mean, that stuff sells, you know.
It's
but
funny because I think Evan has a kind of a Egon
Egon
Sheila
Sheely.
thing, and I don't know if he even knows who that guy is. I don't think he even knows that artist's work, but I should probably turn him on to it. But
Yeah.
I think, another thing is that we have to remember is that, when your kids see you do this for a living, that's dad's thing.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily their thing. They might have what they want. They want to do something for them. It's them.
Yeah.
And I just found out recently my 13-year-old wants to draw comics for a living, and he never talks about it with me. I wonder why. Because then
Yeah.
I might open my mouth.
Yeah.
And he might
Well,
not hear my thoughts about
I
it.
think
He
my-
wants to be his own
yeah.
person.
I think my son saw. He also saw the struggles of like trying to get paid and
Right.
people stealing your artwork, and
He'd starvation.
so he saw the negative ends of it as well.
Yeah.
And I think that discouraged him. I mean, he's done extremely well. He's brilliant. He teaches at Columbia University now. But yeah, he was good, but he didn't have the passion for
Definitely
it.
doesn't need that page rate.
No, no.
No.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the influences you had. James, looking at your story, one influence of yours is underground comics, and Von Bode.
Yeah.
And really, you met him at 15, and he really kind of changed your direction. Talk a little bit about that in underground comics and really alternative of the genre,
Yeah.
not mainstream.
Yeah. Well, most people don't even know who these people are now, but in the 60s and 70s, they called them underground comics, and you could find them at, like head shops or places that sold, like weed paraphernalia. But it was people doing their comics, what they wanted to do. They were adult oriented, if that's what they wanted. There was nudity, there was violence. And when I discovered those, it was like a whole new universe to me. And Von Bode was, he was the first professional I ever met at a convention who I showed him my stuff and he loved it. He gave me a lot of positive influence. Showed me how to lay out a panel, how to add depth to it by having something in the foreground. So even though our styles are diametrically opposed, he's very cartoony, but the constructs of telling a story are universal across any type of style. So he's still a favorite of mine. He passed away in '74, but
Wait, you met him before '74?
yeah.
Oh.
No, actually, it was about '74. Yeah, I was
Okay.
14. So.
Oh, okay.
So, and the idea that, that whole underground scene kind of collapsed with the direct market in the 80s, but so it didn't last very long. But now
Also, it gave way to more alternative and
now
counterculture.
the mainstream comics have their adult lines.
At the time that the underground comics were popular, you really didn't have any other alternative to.
Yeah, if
what
you
was
weren't
at the
into
drugstore, Marvel, DC, Charlton, Atlas. Everything was very clean cut. It was very, Comics Code, approved. And these guys were doing their own thing, and they were having a mimeographed or just cheaply printed up, and the counterculture ate that up in every major city, especially New York and San Francisco. And so you have like R. Crumb and Spain Rodriguez and Clay Wilson and those guys who are now kind of legendary figures. And they were sort of the answer to the Jack Kirby and the Steranko. And well, even Steranko was kind of cutting edge for what he was doing. 'Cause
Yeah,
was
he
bringing
was,
sort of
yeah.
pop culture thing at the time. But for me, just like kind of your basic Bronze Age, late Silver Age Marvel comics were just kind of mind blowing to me. At the time I was 8 years old, and I was really into reading. I liked to go to the library. I liked to draw. Obviously, I liked Saturday morning cartoons and whatever was on after school or before school. And I think as far as art goes, I was very captivated by children's book illustration because that's the stuff I was reading. And I still look at that stuff, and I still have reverence for the artists.
What was that, like the famous illustrators like Sun Blom and those?
wasn't even aware of them.
'Cause
Well, for
I
me, it
remember
was-
going to the dentist, and they had this, and every doctor, dentist, waiting room, they had, I guess they were giving out free children's Bible stories with the blue cover, but Sundblom did all the illustrations in it, and I was really impressed with those. I mean, they didn't age well because it's like 1950s haircuts on Adam and
Yeah.
Eve, and
Yeah.
but I just the amount of detail and how they could make the things glow. He was famous for that.
I think the more realistic things when I was younger, I think I tended to, because I was, kind of raised on the sort of Hanna-Barbera and Disney kind of stuff, that children's book illustration, which was somewhat like that, but also more illustrative and a little more artistic. And so I obviously Maurice Sendak, or The Wild Things Are, everybody knows that, or Dr. Seuss, but there were these other illustrators like Mercer Mayer, who ended up becoming a millionaire doing the Little Critter series in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. But before that, in the 70s, his stuff was amazing. He was doing these fully illustrated, just crazy books, and he liked to do monsters and adventure, and his people, everything he drew was amazing, and I just loved that guy's stuff. Wallace Tripp was another illustrator who was very busy in the 60s and 70s. And then and Tripp ended up doing stuff for American Greetings called Paw Prints, these little cute animals. And boy, he could just draw like nobody's business. And then there were other ones. Stephen Kellogg and Bill Peet was another favorite, who was a Disney story guy for decades. He worked on almost every Disney film, all the way up to 101 Dalmatians, which was really his baby. He left Disney and he became a children's book illustrator, and he probably did at least 40 books, wrote and illustrated 40 books. And his style was very, you could see a kind of an animation Disney influence, but I didn't really know that's what it was. I didn't know he worked for Disney.
Right.
I just knew when I was 5 years old, so a teacher read this book called The Wump World to us, and from then I was hooked on his stuff. Now I have all his stuff and read them all to my kids and stuff. And for a while I thought it would be great to be a children's book illustrator and be an author. And then when I was at a friend's house at 8 years old, and he introduces me to his comic book collection. This kid was from back east, so comics were a much more prevalent, accepted sort of thing. And in Northern California, in the suburbs, comics were not really an accepted common thing. I didn't know a lot of kids that read comic books or collected them. So I meet this kid who's got this big comic book collection. He even had those Steranko History of Comics books.
Oh, wow.
The big oversized publications. I mean, he had an older brother who was almost 20, who had a huge collection he would never let us look at or touch. And I just fell in love with this stuff. It was Jack Kirby.
I was that older brother too. Don't touch my comics.
Get out of my room, locked up. But he introduced me to the world of Marvel Comics, and I was instantly obsessed. So by the summer of 1974, I was like Conan, Thor, Ghost Rider, Son of Satan, Avengers, Fantastic Four. I mean, I was obsessed. I remember the following year we took a road trip. We drove from California to Calgary, Alberta, to visit relatives. And the whole way there and back, all I thought about was comics. Every town we went to, I was looking for a 7-Eleven or someplace that sold comic books. And it drove my parents crazy. It literally drove my mom insane to where I think 2 years later, I went to school and came back, and my entire comic book collection of like maybe 300 books was gone. Because
I had that too.
She blamed my behavior and her troubles. My mom was mentally ill. She just didn't know what to do. She was, raising 3 kids, not by herself, but my dad was at work all the time. I came home, my comic collection was gone. She thought that was the problem. She thought that was going to solve it, and then she
You're
realized
wasting
very
your
quickly
time.
that-
You're wasting your money. Yeah, I had the same thing.
Because they grew up in an era when comics were demonized in the 50s.
Well, yeah,
So they thought they were rotting my brain.
they're throwaway mediums. You don't keep them. You read it. You give it to somebody else or
My
throw
mom
it away.
has since apologized. They've since seen the light. They understand very, very well, the importance of those books. I mean, my reading comprehension was through the roof in 3rd or 4th grade. I was reading college level, and so they quickly realized. Also, too, like no one at school ever told them I was a mentally gifted minor. I didn't even know until I was in 7th grade when some English teacher. I just thought they considered me like a problem and hyperactive or something. bunch of kids that had learning disabilities, and I was in there with them. I was running that class after the first day, and I was in there for 2 days. I didn't know why. I thought I was just in trouble. And then like the next, I think it was 2 years later in 7th grade, one of my English teachers let slip that I had this status as what they call MGM. And I had no idea. My parents didn't know, because they were like, what's wrong with this kid? Why can't he sit still in class? You know, he's always running around. You know, he's always drawing on everything. And so I grew up thinking there was something wrong with me, and that comics were part of, if there's something wrong with you and you like comics, there's something wrong with comics too. Even though I loved them, I couldn't, you know, I couldn't help that.
Well, it's interesting also that, you know, reading about both of your stories, you know, some of your influences is goth, is metal. You know, you did a Rob Zombie cover. You know, they talk about, you know, The Crow and, you know, some of the stuff you did with Kiss. You know, is metal as a genre, is that something that kind of helped you out in your career to maybe go in a different direction than, say, if you were interested in a different genre of music?
You mean, was music an inspiration on the direction our work took?
Absolutely.
I think maybe to a certain degree. But to me, it was, I mean, I wasn't so much like a metalhead, and I know you were a metalhead. You were more like emo.
Punk rock,
punk rock,
punk
goth,
rock,
emo
and then
stuff.
goth.
You know, the church, ministry,
Joy Division,
that's the
The Cure.
Yeah. And I started out like, you know, being Beatles fan.
Well, I started out that way too,
Beatles,
but
and then you move on to, like, say, for me it was like Beatles, and then Oyster Cult, Led Zeppelin, Judas Priest, and got really, there was like, I got to the peak of heavy metal in like 1983 or 4, and then I moved off of that into like new wave, and then started getting into like the Replacements and college radio, and so I went through the whole gamut. And for me, that was just something that occupied one part of my brain. I don't know that I feel like there's a direct correlation between what I was listening to and what I was drawing, but I do feel like all those influences that you have, they kind of just, it's like a wave that you kind of ride out as you progress.
Well, it's you know, still to this day, it's extremely important to me. You know, like it's I approach a drawing or a painting as, I don't want it to be a clever illustration and with, you know, oh, look at the detail on that. I want people to look at it and feel something, you know, just to get some emotional impact out of it, you know. And, you know, the world is full of clever, brilliant artists who know how to do compositions and just, they got a million tricks, but I look at it and it's just dead to me. It's like, it's really well done, you know, he's a consummate craftsman, but I don't feel anything when I look at it, you know, other than, oh, well done, you know. So I use music still to this day. Like if I'm drawing a violent scene in a book or a cover, that's what I'll listen to, because it puts me, it's like other people use drugs. It puts me in the exact frame of mind. If it's a sad scene, I'll listen to depressing music, you know.
So you do feel like you need to set the mood when you're working.
I do, definitely, you know, and that instantly gets me there. Within 3 notes of a song, I'm emotionally on that level. So it affects me deeply, but I've heard that people with manic depressive have, you know, overly.
Well, I don't know. I mean, for me, my.
I mean, how like 3 or 4 notes from a song can change how you feel almost instantly. You know?
Yeah. No, I think music. I mean, it's interesting to me that when music isn't important to people.
Yeah, I don't get that.
They didn't grow up listening to music, and then they didn't need the music to get them through their lives.
Yeah, I was shocked that Bernie refused to have music playing while he was drawing. I didn't get it at all, you know. He wanted silence.
Yeah, I have to have something going on TV, like a movie or something.
I find that too distracting.
Well, it has to be something dialogue heavy or something I've seen before, so I don't feel the need to. But part of my brain needs to be occupied while the other part of my brain's doing what I'm doing when it comes to art. But I can't be listening to any music with lyrics when I'm writing. I can't be having some TV on when I'm writing.
Yeah.
Some people like to write when they have like movie soundtracks on, but I tend to write in silence. But I need to, when I'm working on art, I need some sound. You know, whether it's music or like a radio program.
I can't stand silence, you know. Well, I grew up in Detroit, and you always left your TV on and the radio and the lights so people didn't rob your house. They thought you were home. So my entire life, it's just like there's always been background noise. And so, you know, now I have a loop of old radio shows and 3 fans going. I need some kind of noise because the silence is just deafening, you know.
in the beginning of my
So it's a
freelancing
comfort
career,
to me, yeah.
when I wanted to be doing something else and I had deadlines and I knew I had to sit down and work, part of your brain wants to go play and go
Yeah,
do something
definitely.
else, or sit down and watch, videos or something, movies, I mean. And
That cat needs to be
so
scratched right now,
that
yeah.
part of your brain needs to be occupied while your art brain goes to work.
Yeah, I haven't thought
That's,
about that.
that's
like
chiefly
that,
why I
you
have
know.
something, have to have something going on.
Yeah,
while I'm
I always just thought maybe I kick myself in the ass. Like, you're drawing for a living, you love it. People pay you good money for this. Why the fuck are you stalling around? So I get up at 6 o'clock every morning, and by 9 o'clock I'm at the drawing board. And even if I don't want to be there, if I'm in a sour mood and something hasn't gone right with a publisher or a Hollywood thing, within like 20 minutes I'm having fun.
Yeah.
I
think warm-ups are important for a lot of
Yeah.
artists too. I don't necessarily do warm-ups, but sometimes I find myself doing
Well, don't you
something-
consider your sketches like warm-ups?
Well, if I'm going to sit down and start some major painting, I don't normally do like a color comp or a rough
No?
of the painting first. Occasionally I do. Or if the
Yeah,
job
I still do,
requires
but
it,
it's
they
very
wanna
loose.
see a color comp.
Yeah, I do, but yeah, it's just no one else can tell what's going on.
I just
Yeah.
decide, okay, is this a cool or warm situation? What's the light source? Is it a warm light source? Is it a cool light source? Is there a color that's like a major color I want to use? And then I kind of go from there. But before I tackle the painting, I usually just sit down and try and do some little quick thing to get my brain and my hand and my brain together, if I need to.
And we are out of time, but if you want to see the work that James and Dan have done,
Yeah,
they're
please
on
come
Artist
to the
Alley.
table.
Yeah.
We
We're
all
sitting right
got,
next to each other
we
at
got
Artist Alley.
prints and artwork. I don't have a banner, but look for Dan's. So
Look for Jim. He's his own banner.
And we're going to continue to talk comics with Tony right there. Or if Tony wants to start asking questions, then,
Yeah,
just
you got
do
a
it.
question, Tony? Got a question for the panel?
yeah.
You're
What's
heard of Bazooka
what's your
Bubblegum?
favorite tool? Yeah.
They have these cartoon strips in there, and there's a lot of good ideas in there. Yeah.
Cereal
I just
boxes.
Look
Yeah.
I just look and see what the hot sellers in comics are, and I copy all that stuff.
Yeah. He's being very sarcastic, in case you didn't know. Yeah.
Oh, really? No, I just try and why come up with your own ideas when you can just steal other people's great ideas? Yeah. Sure.
I mean, there's my first question right there. So let's give a hand for Dan and James there, and welcome up Tony as well. Thank you, James. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Thanks as always. As usual.
Yes, sir. Right there, and I'll put you guys back.
Tony, last name, please.